Thank you for that. Nicole is going to take us to the next slide. This is where we meet our 5/6 panelists. And for those of you who have just joined, Clarence has met his foe, which is technology. He is trying to join. He's working on joining. He will join soon. So we have Amara, Clarence, Portia, Rachel, Anne, and Tara. Nicole, can we read a little bit about Amara? We encourage you all, while you listen to our panelists, there might be moments when you say, I don't know what to do. I really want to help. I don't know what to do. We have an answer for you. One of many things you can do is support each and every one of our panelists, many of whom have actually included a link on how to support them with action, with communications, and with financial means for the causes that they represent. Please consider that. You're not expected to do that. We all appreciate any kind of support you can provide our panelists and the causes they represent. Our next is Clarence, who is with us in spirit. Then we have Portia. Nicole is the founding member of Momentum, and I'm a part of Momentum. Here's our mission. So we're going to pause for a minute to really understand the three things that we agree that we're here for. This is going to be mainly a one-way presentation. Thank you, Shane. And Nicole, I think Clarence was going to lead us through a brief exercise.
Yes, he was. I was hoping once I stopped presenting, all of the people who are quote unquote stuck in the waiting room would be able to get in, because I'm getting this message from more than Clarence. But that doesn't seem to be the case.
Let me take over with the presenting part, see if that helps. Let me see if I can take over, actually, because I think you're the owner of this. Nope.
Anne, would you be willing to lead us in a movement centering?
You mean me?
Yeah, you.
Okay. I have to say that I am most off-centered today because I have a hip flexor injury. So I will try to give you a balanced centering in my uncentered state. Let's see. I guess everyone just close your eyes and think about your breath and breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in and breathing out. We're here to listen and to have a communication and to be in our bodies with that and to feel the words that we share. I'm asking for an open heart from each of us. I'm asking for eyes that are open to possibilities in what we learn and gain from tonight. Breathing in. Breathing out. You are enough. Contribute when you can in your community, but most importantly, contribute to yourself in this walk. Last breathe in. Breathe out, open your eyes, roll your shoulders. Take your head around once. Thank you. Thank you for that. Is everybody good? I feel so relaxed now. It's great. You're welcome. You guys are so sweet. You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone. As we navigate the wonders of technology, I actually had to leave momentarily and I'm back on. Nicole, is everything okay on your end? All right. So I cannot present. I cannot do anything but just speak to our panelists and follow along with the slides that we presented, that we have prepared. So Nicole, we're not sharing the screen right now. I'm not, and I can't. I have fingers, but my computer is being super great. So we want to let everyone know that we share 3 questions with our panelists. Number 1 is, what does this work of decolonizing, diversify a creative practice or curriculum or pedagogy look like in your life? We told all our panelists to discuss at their pace, within their interest, and that we would listen to them. The next question is, what brings you joy or gives you life in doing this work this way? And the third question is, what do you still want to see done? Not something that you have to do yourself. So these are the 3 questions that are informing the conversation that we will all listen to right now. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for bearing with us. And now I'm going to be quiet. Which means that our panelists should unmute themselves so we can hear your conversation. Anne, I think you're muted. Rachel, thank you for unmuting yourself. Tara, there you go. Thank you, Amara. And Portia, thank you. No way, we have Clarence. Clarence
Yes, my
is here.
voice.
Thank you so much.
Hello.
All right, Clarence, you have a knack for showing up exactly when it's pertinent. So we are just going to dive into our conversation. We have done everything else, and now we all listen.
Okay.
Well, I can jump off and start with, one thing I think would be beautiful to improve the pedagogy when we're talking about teaching theater and teaching arts is to appreciate texts from other cultures. I mean, I think that's one thing that we could do is stop placing tradition over the word tradition over works of Shakespeare and parts of dance like ballet. I mean, I was trained in ballet and it's a great foundation, but there are certainly other dance forms and dance styles that can actually be lifted up. And also I feel, extremely with the text the same. I think that we need to think of the information that we put in front of students is just as valuable, if not more valuable, as what we show them or what we teach them. Because if they have a textual background for something that is BIPOC enhanced, then we talk about decolonization and we talk about diversity in the learning.
To that point, like, I am not a teacher, but as somebody who recently got out of the BFA industrial complex, I think that it's important to remember that there is no one-size-fits-all method to this. I was talking today about, being enrolled in a dialects class that had no African dialects on it. Like, the things that were being taught to me were not going to be useful to me in the real world, and I had to fight for my ability to study something that I actually thought I would use. And a lot of the work that I had to do as a student, like, I think I made at least 4 of my classes myself because none of my teachers were equipped with the knowledge about, like, Black playwrights. Like, I had to find Adrian Kennedy on my own. I had to find, like, all of these people on my own. I had to, read Spunk. I made a course about accurate representation of Black women in theater, but I had to make these things. Like, my teachers were not equipped with the tools to do that, but I was paying the same amount as my peers, but they got to learn about people who looked like them and they didn't have to search as hard as I did. And I think that that's unfair.
So I'm here in South Coast, Massachusetts, in a very small community of maybe 20,000 people, mainly Black and white, the Black portion being Cape Verdeans, who we come from Africa. And I feel that you should have a curriculum that's reflective of your students. So for us, we have the Pilgrims. We're close to Plymouth Rock. Those students who have lineage connected to the Pilgrims are elevated, spoken of. Cape Verdean culture is nowhere present in the school, and we are part of the settlers here as well. So I feel like a curriculum that really kids can identify with and see themselves in and speak to the population that is there.
And then sorry, Rachel, were you going?
That's okay, go ahead,
and then also with that, thinking about teaching these plays, these stories, curriculums, etc., that are also not reflective of the students that you have is extremely important. And so I, as an Indigenous person, specifically Seminole and Muskogee Creek, is that how the majority of folks who are tuning in think of the theater is very much rooted in the European colonized way of creating art. And so for more than a millennium, Indigenous people across the world have been telling stories in various ways that look very different, and some other ways that may be similar, may remind you of similarities than the traditional theater. And so whenever we're talking about decolonizing theater, same thing with dance, the arts in general, it's having to take a step back from what we think of theater, what we think of dance, because what we have thought of theater, what we have thought of dance for so long has been the colonized Eurocentric way of doing it. And so before we can even have that conversation of how do we diversify, et cetera, is learning where those roots are and how they have historically excluded and continue to exclude people. And so speaking personally now as an Indigenous person, it's very unlikely that you will have an Indigenous person in your program. But does that mean you do not need to teach Indigenous playwrights? Absolutely not. Folks need to know that we are real and that we exist. And furthermore, whenever we do our land acknowledgements, we don't just say, I acknowledge. As I see in the chat here, we need to be specific, put names, use our voices for these names of people who are still here, who still steward this land. And then also being very specific about who built it. Yes, stolen people, but who are those folks today? Those are Black folks. We need to be explicit and specific before we can even begin to do this decolonizing work.
I think even the term traditional is already very much into the realm of colonization, because whose tradition are we talking about when we say traditional? You know, and we need to expand that word. We all have traditions that existed before we came to America. We have traditions that exist outside of that Eurocentric view. And those traditions are just as valuable, just as creative, and have as much to share with the world as those traditions that are based in European culture. And so I think even just tearing that apart, what do we mean when we say tradition? Maybe there's a different word we should be using. If we don't mean everyone's traditions, perhaps we should be using a word that is more specific to whose traditions we're talking about. And perhaps we need to qualify that when we say tradition. We say Eurocentric tradition. All right. And if it's not Eurocentric tradition that we're talking about, then let's be specific to what other traditions we're talking about. When we use the word tradition default to mean a Eurocentric tradition, then we kind of negate the value of all other traditions and hold it as above. This is the norm and everything else is something else. That's a very colonized view of tradition. So I think that's one place to start, you know, and Amara, you were talking about dialects. So in answering that question of how do I work to decolonize, one of the key things that I teach is dialect work. And I'm doing research now to expand what dialect resources are available for accents for people of African descent outside of the continent of Africa. Right now, the majority of the resources I find are very broad brushed. They make it sound like everyone in America who's Black sounds the same. Everyone in Jamaica who's Black talks the same, you know, and in fact, we have very different dialects. You know, when you go to find out a dialect from someone in England, you can get down to what neighborhood they live in and find resources. When it comes to people of African descent, you brought up the entire nation with one or two accents. So I'm working to change that and make more resources available so that our dialects can be represented just as specifically as white dialects are represented in the work. So I think that's part of decolonizing. I also think it's very important that in teaching, not only are we teaching different playwrights, we're also teaching different methodologies. All of the methodologies that I have learned of doing theater are based in European teachers. And if you look at my bio, you'll see a whole bunch of European teachers, and those are the people I know: Stanislavski, you know, and Meisner, and you know, Alexander Technique, people of European descent. I am working to do research so that I can find out more of who are the great teachers that come from my ancestors' history. You know, I have been separated from my ancestral lands for hundreds of years. And so I don't have that information as readily available as I would like for it to be. So that is something that I plan to make the center of my research for the next 5 years. It's really delving into who are those teachers, how can we bring them into the collegiate curriculum, and not negating those teachers that we've learned in the past because there's value there, but also bringing in the value of other cultures as well.
This is Clarence speaking. You can't see me, I'm the disembodied voice here, but it's a Black body with waist-length dreadlocks. And so it's unmistakable in looking at me about where my ancestors are, where my roots, predominantly my roots come from. 42% are Nigerian in ancestry on the paternal side. But believe it or not, the majority of my professional work and what I teach are actually ballet and modern. So extremely rooted in the Eurocentric traditions, if we are to use that word. So, for instance, 2 summers ago, I walked into a couple of ballet studios in the summer in the South, and faces cracked visibly when they saw this black body walking in there with dreadlocks and a white beard and wondering, had I walked into the wrong space? For me, it's about making sure that people understand, or that I teach from my viewpoint, is that I am teaching the whole body, and I'm not using any ideals that this tradition is only for a specific body type. This is something that Misty Copeland is now helping to work through the balletic world, in that there's they want a body that has no breasts, no hips, no thighs, which is exactly the opposite of what so many American bodies, so many other bodies around the world have. So it's not even a feminine body. So it's anti-feminine. Just what we have in the balletic world. So I am stepping in. I try to make sure that it is the whole body experience. I go through and I make sure that students see images of a diverse range of bodies for instance, my dance studio. I have a huge computer monitor on the wall, and when the screensaver is flipping through, there are images of different kinds of bodies that are dancing there, mostly ballet and modern. And one of my aims is to diversify that even more, to get in people who are disabled, to get in flamenco dancers, to get in other dance genres that are there. But making sure that people see that the roots, even though it goes starts in Italy and moves out from Italy. One of the first American male dancers of note was a man by the name of George Washington Smith, who was titled, or at least named himself, as being mulatto. So for those of us who know, that one drop rule sets in. So he was black and danced with white ballerinas here in Europe right as we were establishing this nation.
I think a great question for us to be looking at too is, what is it that we're hoping to see what is it that we're hoping to see change, and that is beyond the things that we can exclusively do ourselves. I know for me, one of the things that I'm hoping to see change is what the rooms look like where decisions are made, because right now in the majority of the theater world and the arts world in general, at least in the United States of America, I know, it's mostly people that do not look like what our country looks like, do not represent the diversity of our country. And as long as the decisions are being made by one group of people, they will never be representative of the entirety of our nation. So if we really want to see change, if we really want to see diversification and decolonization, then they need to make some space in those rooms for other voices, and not just make space for those other voices, but actually listen to them when they speak in those rooms. Because that's something that I found sometimes too. I have been the one representative of Black culture in a room and been completely ignored. And that then there's no point in me being there. You're just putting me there so that you can say you did something, you can say you were diverse. But if you're not actually listening to the other voices and you only listen to the echo chamber, then you're not truly diverse, you're not truly decolonizing.
I would also add that stop making the burden lie on the Black person in the room, or the person of color in the room. It's just a constant, and you handle that, to the EDI person who traditionally is a Black woman. And once the resources dry up, that person gets othered, and then they get fired or they quit. And so there's this constant door of absolute exhaustion of people of color who are moving into white spaces, white art spaces, because everything is dumped into their lap. You know, they're the supposed to be the blanket savior of their EDI problem because they want the grant money to keep coming in. So I would like to see that pressure relieved off of the people of color that are working within an art space, in the staff, and also on the stage. I think it's really important that we pay attention to the fact that this is emotionally draining and also can be career killing, and also inspiration and dream killing. I feel that people of color don't enter the arts generally from a place of, oh, this is something that I'm going to do in order to find a husband or get a degree, a higher degree. They're doing it because they have a passion about it and they want to do it. And the dreams of these people are constantly crushed because they move into a white space and are absolutely used up completely. So I would love for more attention and space to be given for the white people in an organization to learn and do and educate themselves instead of relying on the person of color in the room to give them the answers.
For me, I think the big thing I want to tackle in the next, I don't know, 2 years that we're not going to have theater for real is accessibility. Because that's become the thing that I can't get over right now. Like I made a joke, but everybody's like, "You okay, sis?" If you've ever seen this man say that he's delivered, I was like, "I don't make theater no more. I'm delivered." Because it's hard. If the crux of your artistry is accessibility, how do you then juxtapose that with like what we create and what we do? And I'm based in New York, so everything is an absurd amount of money here. So it's just really like, you can't get the people that you make the art for in the room to see the thing. You can't get the people that you want to work with in the room to make the thing because nobody has the resources. Nobody can take off work to, make $150 a week. Like that's not sustainable. That's not a thing that can actually support a life. And so I think a lot about accessibility right now and what that looks like. We were talking today about, what does it look like to essentially, we're missing a lot of people because these people don't see themselves reflected in these roles, right? Like art is not something that is readily accessible to people from different socioeconomic backgrounds or from like different ethnicities or differently abled positions. Like these are the things that are missing. So you end up with a lot of people only seeing actors and thinking they only want to be actors or performers because that is what they see. So like, how do you change the casting? How do you change, people who want to be artistic directors? How do you do that when we already don't see ourselves in these roles and when we don't make space for people to see themselves in these roles? So I'm thinking a lot about accessibility in terms of like who's in the room, who can get into these spaces, who's in these Zoom calls, who's on these, Zoom play readings, because they all seem pretty white to me too. And then what does it look like in schools? What does it look like in different spaces? Because accessibility is like a large part of the frontier for me.
So whenever I imagine go ahead, Clarence.
Yes, I was on a board, again, the only person of color, and what the board had done is when they looked around the table and realized they did not have an educator on the board, that they didn't have a youth on the board. This particular board had a financial obligation in order to be on the board. You had to be able to, I'm just going to pull out, $5,000 a year. I don't remember what it actually was. But this was not something that a high school youth could afford to do. And it certainly was not something that when I was just coming in to becoming a public school teacher, that I could just throw out, I'll just throw out $5,000 to sit on a board. And so what these board members did to begin diversifying themselves, all or predominantly white males, is they split up those two seats and said, okay, here's $10,000 and we will divide that up amongst the 8 of us and then bring in the diversity that we need to help try to bring something new, somebody else different on the board, because that was completely, something that a school teacher was not capable of doing. So that was just one way in which I thought was effective. Again, I was the only person there, unfortunately, but it was a step in the right direction. I would lay that out as a table as a possibility if people are listening for ways in which they might diversify the spaces and the tables that they're seated at.
I like that our panel decided to do things their own way. So I read 3 questions and you started with number 3 and then you kind of meandered to number 1 and we haven't touched number 2 and I have a number 4 to offer. So to remind you, take whichever you want. But the second question is what brings you joy or gives you life in doing this work? Because it's clearly a calling. And the question that I would like to throw in there, I noticed that language is the problem in many instances. The use of words like traditional or primitive or this and that. So I wonder, and this is just a fun question, a little question, if you could ban a word or 2 from the business, what would they be and why? But sit on that for a minute. So you can talk about what brings you joy and what makes it, worth doing. But also if at any point you're like, there's this word that I never want to hear again, we're happy to hear that too.
Can I just jump in on the what brings you joy question?
Wait, I'm sorry. Can we hear what Tara was going to say before Clarence went, before we finish topics?
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Amara. Yeah, so what I was going to say, this ties into the bring you joy question. So, I was thinking ahead. Is thinking about what I want to see in the future. And what I want to see is BIPOC artists represented in every single level of the organization, from the board all the way down to the contractor we bring in to help sew one costume for the one show, because that is the only way to have true equity. And what comes from that is decolonized leadership principles, because whenever we have Black, Indigenous, and people of color in these positions, Eurocentric work is no longer the standard. That is no longer the quote unquote neutral. Also, it's not neutral. Just saying. Anyway, and so what really brings me joy in this is, very similar to you, Amara, having no access whatsoever to Native artists and not knowing that Native theater artists existed until I was in my 20s, which is so sad to say. But what brings me joy here is that the work that I create is so uniquely tied to land. It's tied to Indigenous storytelling. It's also tied to Indigenous consensus and how we create together in a room. It starts in ceremony, it ends in ceremony. And it's a very truly collaborative process that's way outside this world of colonized theater. But what truly gets me going, and even though it is so difficult, being erased all the damn time, anyway, is that the people who are able to come into that room, that's the first time they're able to feel like they're able to be themselves, how they want to create. We don't have to translate. We don't have to code switch. We don't have to leave our indigeneity, our culture, our opinions at home before we walk into the door to do a Thornton Wilder play. Right? They're able to be authentically who they are and tell the stories they want to tell. And so the fact that as a director, a playwright, and producer, I'm able to do that is what gets me going through these hard times. And it really brings me joy is seeing other folks a lot younger than I have that first touch into, wow, I can do this. I don't have to be tied and bound to these Western pony shows. Or these stereotypical images of what natives are, or Disney's Pocahontas, so don't even get me started. Anyway, they can actually be authentic and move forward. And then also seeing how that uplifts everyone in the room, not just Native folks. But whenever you're able to create and show up in the room how you want to create and that be supported and not shut down, that's why we're doing it. And so the word I want to ban, because I already thought of it, is the word pioneering. Lots of reasons. Number 1, it's anti-Indigenous. Number 2, I can guarantee all these things about pioneering have already been done before by a Black person, Native person, person of color. It's already been done. So if we could erase that word, I'd be very happy about it. Thanks.
If I could, I'd like to address a couple of the things I've seen come up in the chat. One is, how do you deal with not with plays that have characters of different ethnicities, but not having a cast of color? So I have a couple questions about that question, actually. One is, why do you not have a cast of color? Why are there no actors of color available to you? If it's because you're in a a school that doesn't have actors of color, unless it's a public school that's just in an area where there's no people of color, then you need to work on getting some students of color. If it's a matter of it not being available in your area, then perhaps you don't do the play with the characters of different ethnicities as a production, but you teach it in your class. So they're still exposed to it without being asked to portray an ethnicity that they're not. That would be my suggestion. Someone also asked to define BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color is what we mean when we say, BIP, BIPOC. And then as far as what brings me joy, is one of the things that I wanted to get into. What brings me joy, all right? So when this last semester, this last year, I taught one of the schools that I've taught at. I taught at 3 schools this year, 4. One of the schools I taught at, there was only one Black student in the 2 classes that I was teaching there. And I was teaching dialects and teaching voice, and I taught them how to study a dialect. And I gave them an example of a person who had donated their dialect to us. So they donated samples of themselves speaking. And I had the students analyze and dissect that dialect. It was a person of Jamaican descent. And so one of the joys I had in the room was because these kids had been used to being taught Eurocentric work, was having that moment of the Black student in the room being like, here's something for me. That's one of the things that brought me joy. And then also having that moment of, one of the white students raising their hand and saying, look at me, I have blue eyes, blonde hair, and dark skin. No one's ever going to ask me to do this accent. And being able to say to her, well, there are also students in this class who don't have those things, who are being asked to learn the accents that are useful to you. Don't you think that you should also learn some of what may be useful to them? Don't you think it should go both ways? So having that moment of being able to not only teach an accent, but also to teach empathy, to teach making space in the room for everyone, to all of the students, and teaching that you don't always have to be the center of the universe. Sometimes you can step back and let someone else be the center. I think that's something that brings me joy. And not that student had any ill intentions, but for them to have a moment of seeing the world from a different perspective and seeing the room from the perspective that Black student had always been forced to see it, I think was really useful. And having a chance to say, look, by learning how to learn an accent, you are learning a skill, and it doesn't have to be an accent that you will use. So that's something that I had to do when I was learning accents, because I wasn't taught accents that I was likely to use. The closest thing was an Indian accent, which is still not something I'd be likely to use. So having that chance of but I had to focus on, I'm learning how to learn an accent. So then when I need to, I will know how to do it. And having that chance to have different students have that same experience is one of the things that brought me joy. And then the word I'd like to ban is urban, because I'm so tired of being asked to be more urban. Like, what the heck does that mean? Especially if I'm auditioning for a play that takes place in rural Mississippi. Why are you asking me can I be more urban? Be specific about what it is that you want from me. You don't want me to be more urban. You want me to be more stereotypically Black. That's what you want. So just, if you're not willing to absolutely come out and say what it is that you mean, then it's probably something you shouldn't be saying. And codifying it with the word urban does not make it better. So that's my piece on that.
Happiness is a weird word for me. Joy is a weird word for me. It's a concept. I don't know if it's real. I don't know. I started making this YouTube series maybe a month and a half ago, and that's been bringing me like joy steadily. It's called Skinny and White Aren't Character Traits. In this paper, I'll explain. And I take on like historical roles in the American musical theater that I truly don't believe have to be white. I have a dramaturg with me, my best friend Colby. He goes through the script. He writes down every instance that anybody talks about a physical character trait or appearance. And then we break that down. And then I talk about Black people in the context of the show. So the first episode is about Greece. And I talk about Black people in Chicago, which is where it's based off of and everything. And that's brought me a specific type of joy because there's so little expectation around it, and because it's a thing that I've made myself. And I really enjoy that. Like, I think that I've spent at least the last like 7 years trying to figure out how to make myself a better version of who people want me to be, and trying to make my work a version of something that people find acceptable and desirable. And I was just like, you know what? We're in quarantine. Can't nobody go nowhere. We have a captive audience. I am captive myself. Let's just like make this thing. And so that's really exciting to me. The word I would ban, skinny and white. Skinny and white aren't character traits in this paper. I'll explain. The word I would ban is sassy. I hate it. Leave me alone. I'm not sassy. Like, I was literally just sitting wrapped in a blanket one day on a meeting recently with another theater professional. And she was like, look at Amara, just sitting there looking so sassy. And I was like, I'm literally sitting here wrapped in a blanket, ma'am. Please leave me alone. I feel attacked. I feel personally victimized by Regina George right now. Please leave me alone. And so I think that words like that do a lot of damage in the way we perceive people. So like the reason I made this whole thing is because it's for a multitude of reasons. Back in 2017, when I first moved to the city, I was in a workshop with the casting director, and I had chosen to sing Cabaret. And it was right after I had seen Prince of Broadway, and Brianna Parham, who I love, sang Sally Bowles. And it was kind of life-changing for me because there was this Black woman singing, you know, maybe this time, and I like lost it. And she also sang the song from She Loves Me, Will He Like Me, from She Loves Me. And Brianna is amazing soprano and just like gorgeous in every way. And I sang this song in part because of her, and this casting director looked at me after I sang it and he said, you know, I don't know why you chose to sing that. I would have such a hard time casting you in that role. And I cast this show regionally a lot. And so it's like, if this is what we are being brought into, this is the world that we're told exists, and we're also told that there's no way of getting out of this world, right? Even though our job is supposed to be creators, our job is supposed to be imaginators of this different world, and it's never different. So like, what does that even look like? What does that mean? What do we do? It's very disconcerting to me. So yeah, I don't like sassy. Leave it alone. Stop trying to cast 25-year-old fat Black women as Motormouth Maybelle. The list could go on. That's it.
I'll do the second question as well. I have a concert at the end of the academic year. It's the student dance concert. And there's usually about a cast of about 35 to 60 dancers from around the campus. And it's a dance variety show: hip hop, praise, ballroom, modern, you name it. It's just got a full range of dance styles and a whole range of different bodies doing it. And the joy that I get not only is as the dancer, the director of the program, seeing the dancers on stage, it's actually going out into the lobby as the audience is coming into the space and seeing that same diversity in the lobby for the audience that are coming in. I'll go to a lot of shows, and I'll go to the Broward Center or the Kravis Center, and all the ushers and all know me because I'm the Black person who always comes to the shows, and so they can easily identify me in the 2,000, 3,000 seat theaters that they're in. And it's like I'm stuck out there in the middle of nowhere. As my mother says, I'm the fly in the buttermilk in the middle of the lobby of the theater. And when I'm sitting out in the lobby and seeing the audiences that my productions bring in, that's what brings me joy, is to see the diversity that's there. And I actually had a former president of the university actually say that to me. She said, this is not just the university coming into this theater, this is the universe. And so I get great joy in seeing that. A while back, when I was living in New York, I auditioned for a show, and they called me up and said, you're a wonderful dancer. We really like you. And you're not our idea of Black. And of course, I didn't know what to say to that. I was just shocked. And they said, we're going to put you in the exotic pile to call you back in. So if I'm going to get rid of something, it's this idea of people trying to, one, use this word exotic, and two, trying to define who and what I am when it's obvious.
Yeah. Okay, I'll jump in here, Portia. So I'm coming to this from a bit of a different perspective. I am an activist, actually. actively doing activism for about a month. So this is very grassroots. It's in response to some racist incidents that have been happening at my alma mater, well, my high school where I went to school, in my hometown area. I was living in Florida. I'm back here for COVID in Massachusetts. There have been a spate of racist social media posts, kind of cyberbullying from the white students, and it's a largely white community. And students of color have brought it to the school district, the administrators. They've done very little. So myself and a group of 5 other women came together to address this and to try to expose this and create accountability. What brings me joy is that I went to that school, and I remember how it was for me as one of the few students of color, and it was racist then. We didn't have voices. The white students created the rules. We assimilated to them. We're now hearing from people coming out of the woodwork saying, thank God you guys have created this. This is a space for us to finally voice our experience. This has been going on for decades. We haven't felt solidarity. We haven't felt a place or to be heard. So it's really cathartic. Like, this work for me is deeply personal in my home area. I'm giving back to my community. I'm finding a voice that I didn't have before, and looking to change the school system from the outside in. So it's going to take, curriculum will be addressed, but we're looking at policy right now, getting involved with local politics and trying to appoint people to certain positions, rallying behind people who are running for office that have the right values and that are looking to create change, who are looking to get diversity and inclusion as a role at the school. We're basically looking to dismantle racism at the school, and curriculum will be a part of that. But anyway, to circle all around, it's brand new to me and it feels so energetic. We have 900 people who have joined our group within a month for an area that has about maybe 20,000 people together. So we're mobilizing and kind of unifying our community to create change and making sure that there's accountability, and it just feels super empowering. So I don't have a word that I'm really looking at right now that I want out, but for me, this is my joy, is that I'm kind of combating my experience growing up in a place that I felt was very racist and didn't have a voice for people of color.
I'd like to share the word I'd like to get rid of first, and that word is inclusion. I don't like that word because it indicates that someone is inviting someone in. And when we're looking at the structure of theater and we're looking at structure of the arts organizations, the idea that I believe they should start at 0 and build again together. And so that the inclusion is organic and natural in the foundations of that new structure. Because like I said before, adding someone in to take care of your problems isn't the move. It can't be the move. So the word inclusion is a word that I would much rather just knock out of our vernacular in the arts, in nonprofits, all the way across the board. I think it does more damage than good. The thing that is bringing me joy right now is the fact that I feel like people's voices are being heard, specifically Black voices in the arts. There has been an opportunity of late, literally last week, where voices were added to a systemic situation that hopefully will be reevaluated in the future. So I'm just glad that people who have been harmed and traumatized by this system are finally feeling that they can share their words because there's solidarity. If you are a person of color in this country, in the arts, you have been racially profiled or insulted or misunderstood or. Every one of us. So for people to feel brave and strong enough because there are numbers makes me happy. It gives me joy. Even though I looked really mad right then, but it does really give me joy.
Collectivism is important. And if you haven't read it, you should go read the Center for Cultural Powers Cultural Activation Guide. It's called No Going Back. I'll drop it in the chat. Happy to do it. It's in part about collectivism, and that's the wave, or else we won't survive.
That's the same thing when it comes to healing. Is whenever we are trying to heal from something that is so large, like systematic racism, from 400, 500 years of this shit, from the theater historically and presently not including Black, Indigenous, and people of color, that's a very big thing. And that's something that can't be handled, that I believe, on your own. It needs to come from the community. It can be community-led healing and empowerment to move forward. I mean, that's something that's very much rooted in my principles and cultures as a Seminole and Muskogee person. I mean, but it's also true across the board. When we think of like intergenerational trauma, that requires intergenerational healing to make that happen. And so I think that's what gives me a lot of joy about right now, is seeing so many folks coming together to center and uplift those who need to be centered and uplifted right now, which are Black Americans in this country, to move forward together as a collective unit. So that's also giving me some joy right now.
Yeah.
So what I heard from Amara and then Tara is the natural reaction to my question of what word would you like banned, and then Amara offered collectivism, and that sounds like a word and a concept that maybe we should be using more often. So moving away from the things we don't want, the ones that we want. And then Tara, I'm taking notes on everything I'm hearing, and my note for Tara is like, Tara is done with this shit. Tara is not having it anymore. And that is wonderful. And she started with like, I'm done with this. And then we need to explain. I love it. And then you quickly move to how do we uphold and heal and support each other. So that's actually the collectivism and the connection that we're seeking in this environment. Because every time I hear this, people are saying, well, why do it? And how could you not do this work, right? So thank you for that. And thank you for bringing us to the things that need to be happening after we ban those 6 words. Collectivism. And Tara, thank you for being done with it. We need more people to be done with this shit.
Yeah, I can do that. I think that, like, again, to talk more about collectivism, essentially it's creating buy-in for the people who are not directly affected by these things. Because the rest of us, not all of us, but like largely our communities have been a part of this. How can this change be taught? Essentially, I think it's learned empathy. I think that that's the way we get people into this work. If you look at the talks of like Jamil Zaki or Valerie Kaur, they both talk about learned empathy in a way that I think is really interesting. And Jamil Zaki has done a lot of the research work behind it, like the statistical work, saying like, I think between 1979 and 2009, people's average empathy rate dropped. Like the average person was 3/4 less empathetic than a person was in 1979, which is fascinating to me. And it's also just like the way the narrative shifted around empathy as something that cannot be learned. It is something that you were either born with, especially as we get into terms like empathic, and you think that those are the only people who know it. Only the people who are born with it are the people who know it. And so what does it look like then to try and reframe that narrative and have a conversation about learned empathy in a way that people understand it? And what does it look like to try and learn empathy? Like, what does an empathy gym look like? And I think that's a lot of our work.
I want to add that I work in the field of intimacy, and what Amar is bringing up is very interesting because the field itself is very new, and actually it originated with the idea that actors needed an ally in the rehearsal room or on set to help them through scenes of sexual violence or scenes with sexual content, so that they would be able to level the power dynamic in the room if they didn't feel comfortable doing something that the director or the producers wanted them to do. So this idea of intimacy director came from that, intimacy coordinators over in LA and land of the Tongva people. And I really feel, I've been approached a few times about coming into a boardroom situation, or coming into a producer situation to talk to the leaders of organizations about what it means to have empathy, to have this idea of intimacy in relationship and conversation before we can start having sex scenes on stage. There have to be plays that have intimacy as well. And how are we going to make sure through this COVID situation that people are feeling safe in the rest of the text? So I'm talking with leaders now and seeing if we can create that dialogue of empathy and to get that back into our art. Because without it, surely we're just money-making factories. And that's what I feel art has become. And whatever sells the ticket is what the art is. And that's not how we started. We started around campfires telling stories of our people. And we told those stories and we cried through those stories. And we felt for our ancestors. And that's where we need to go back to. I'm serious. Burn it to the ground. Build it from the bottom up. And let's get real about the fact that all of us built this system here. So I'm working on that now.
One of the things we were talking about too was like, what does it look like if people are charged with, what if you have to give a pay bump to the people who have to experience rape on stage? What does it look like then? Is that rape then necessary, or is it deemed unnecessary because it would cost you more in the budget? Because we're also not doing a great job of taking care of the artists who are expected to put themselves through this trauma. Like, if you are playing a slave or an enslaved person on stage, what does that mean? What does it mean to give a pay bump to these people? Because we're not providing them with psychological resources. We're not providing them with protection of any kind. So like, what did we go hit them where it hurts?
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. I have a company, intimacy coordinators and directors of color, because there aren't enough people of color in the field of intimacy to hold the emotional weight and care of our actors that we put so much pressure on. So if you put yourself in a situation where there's a scene where a young Black actor is being asked to be handcuffed and slammed against a cop car, over and over and over again, take after take, or weekly, every night during that point, who is checking in on him? And is he looking to the stage manager, who might be white? Is he looking for, where are the places he can go? Or a woman who is, through all of this stuff that's going to be written now, the stories of COVID, the stories of the protests, those stories are going to be written. And so who is going to be there to do the intimacy work and be on set or be there in rehearsal to hold those people as they work on their craft, as they do their profession that they've sometimes spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to learn? This is something that is my passion. It is the drive of my life, is to get more intimacy advocates into these rehearsal rooms and into the sets out here in LA.
Yes. Thank you, Anne.
Sorry, I went off.
I love it. This is also, sorry, I'll be real quick, Clarence, and then I'll throw it back. This is also reminding me of Cherokee playwright Mary Catherine Nagel, and she spoke about the plays that she writes and has been thinking about what does it mean to subject, again, a Native actress to violence on stage, especially whenever we are in the missing and murdered Indigenous women epidemic, especially when 85% of Native women are sexually assaulted. Like, what does that mean? And so she has said and gone on record, you know what? Don't need to write these. I don't need this story. And so another call for my fellow playwrights out there is also to think about, is it necessary? Is having these depictions of violence necessary? To my fellow directors out there, is it necessary to be realistic in how we do these things? And then also, even if we choose not to be realistic, we still need to be hiring Anne and all these intimacy directors there anyway. But it's just another thing to think about that popped in my brain too, is in these stories, as we write them, as we direct them, as we interpret them, do we need all that? And I would go as far to say, maybe not. All right, Clarence.
Oh, no, I was laughing out loud because it was my chuckling in support of what she was saying about the getting people of color in the field of intimacy and understanding the trauma that these bodies are having to relive. You know, I've spent the past month and a half in a rather dark space just reliving all of the racial profiling that I've just gone through, and realizing, oh my God, if I had to call this up, time and time again with each take in a performance, it would just be the most horrendous thing to have to do, and not to have the support there. Somebody, looking out for what it is that I'm going through would be a horrendous thing to have to deal with. So I briefly had an experience as an actor in Oklahoma when I was growing up, where they were doing these things called Crime Stoppers, and invariably they'd be asking for a person of color to portray the person whom they're looking for. And, they had to make this disclaimer at the top of the news show when they would air these things. They're looking for someone. They would either have to blur my face or something and say, this is not the real person. Do not, this is just the actor portraying this person. So, it was just like this very, very scary thing to, I had no idea. I wanted to be on stage and performing. And, the idea of getting to perform in a public space, such as, nightly or weekly, each week at the end of a news station broadcast, was just something that was like, oh my God, this is a chance to do something. And then afterwards, it became this thing. It was like, wait a minute, I'm actually putting myself in a place of danger here, like real danger, because somebody's going to actually think that, oh, wait a minute, isn't that the person we saw? And not understand the real from the Memorex, the false version of it. So I was really applauding what she was saying there for that bit.
I saw someone post in the chat about how this needs to be taught in all schools and like universities, and I completely agree. But I think that the other thing that has to happen before we start teaching intimacy direction is that we have to dismantle the sexism and the sexual harassment that is incredibly prevalent in so many of our institutions, because I haven't talked to a person in the last 3 years who didn't experience some form of sexual harassment in their time in college. And it's because it's ingrained in our field. And until we dismantle that, we're going to have problems. And I know it's hard. I know that folks are like, I don't want to lose my tenure. I don't want to lose my position because I'll be pushed out by the people who are in charge. But like, people are getting hurt. So like, it's your students' health and well-being, or it's your paycheck, and you have to make a decision. And I'm hoping you'll choose the right one, which I think is the people first method. And so like, if we want to talk about intimacy direction, we first have to dismantle this thing where people come out of college really fucking broken, because they can't do anything else with all of this trauma around their work, this trauma around their bodies, around what their bodies look like. Please think about the language that you're using with your students when you tell people that they need to lose 10 pounds to be more successful at work. Please think about the language you're using when you tell people that they are not sexually attractive. Please think about why you have to say that in the first place. You don't. I guarantee you don't. Like, weight actually has very little to do with the work. And if we want to reshape the field, we can't keep making cookie cutter versions of people. We have to start saying, like, you are this is how you are, this is how you look. And we have to start talking more about the work than how people look. That's a large part of it. And we have to stop letting people get sexually harassed in these programs.
And stop trying to add actors to the text. Find the text that suits the actors. There's so many plays. I don't understand why people pick a season before they even meet their students. There's time. You can make time for that. Get to know your students and what they want to do, as opposed to saying, okay, we're going to do these 5 shows. Let's get ready. I'm going to cast it. my 2 cents.
You know, one of the things I was really happy to see along those lines was Little Shop of Horrors was done in the spring at University of Miami, and they cast as Audrey an actress who is a phenomenal actress, beautiful voice, and does not at all look like your traditional person who we think of when we think of that character, having seen it done so many times. You know, she was an African-American young lady, and who of beautifully built size, you know, not someone's, not that the other sizes aren't beautiful, but she wasn't, you know, the typical svelte white actor that we are used to seeing. And she played that role so beautifully. And actually the fact that she was an actress of color portraying this woman who has been through this type of abuse, she brought something to it that was different than what I had seen in the past. And I actually found myself, and I think a lot of other people in the audience too, with the way that what she brought to it, far more moved by the show than I have ever been before. You know, in the past, it's always been like, oh, this is a fun kind of weird show. But she brought to it this thing of not just a woman who is finding her way out of this abuse, but a woman whose ancestors have had to fight their way out of this type of abuse. And there was such a depth to that I had never imagined Little Shop of Horrors having that level of depth, that I was actually moved to tears by the end of the show. So I think reimagining who these characters are is another thing that we really can look at, as well as making sure that our season includes some characters that are actually written to be people of color as well.
Yes,
I'd like to add something.
Oh, go ahead, Clarence, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to add to 2 points. Back to the sexual harassment and all. One of the big things that we need to make sure everyone is doing is that you're registered to vote. We've got Betsy DeVos up here who has absolutely decimated the language from our policies that were supposed to be designed to protect people who were reporting that they have been sexually harassed and raped. And now she has decimated that language and given more power to the abusers than to the and to the people who are supposed to be reporting this. So we need to make sure that if we're going to be arguing, we have to make sure that we argue loudest at the ballot box to make sure things are happening there. And then to add a little bit more to this diversity casting thing, one of the most beautiful things that I love to see is when we take a production and flip all of the dynamics and the parameters within it. And in the space of dance, you know, for instance, a couple of decades ago, the Dance Theater of Harlem did their own version of Giselle, which is supposed to be a Austro-Hungarian story of a woman whose heart has been broken and then she died. And they centered the whole thing in Louisiana on the bayou, and just refocus the whole thing. And I just love it when we can do things like that. I love it when I can see something like a Ballet LOL or the Trocaderos, where they're doing the same classical ballets, but they flipped the gender. And so you get a new meaning, a new definition, a new understanding of what the context is. And I think it goes deeper, and it just shows how universal the work of what the playwright was saying can mean, even if it's not the cast that you're used to seeing, having done so many decades before. The work just becomes deeper, and you pull more from it, because the bodies that are then portraying it come with a whole nother bit of lived stories and experiences that then are imbued in it by who they are when they take over that role. So those were just 2 things I wanted to add to that bit.
And also know that there are myriads upon myriads of Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are playwrights who you can produce instead. Because a conversation that some folks may not be ready for, but we're going to do it, is that a lot of these classic American plays that we think of do not transcend racial lines like we all want to believe that they do. They are so deeply rooted in white supremacy, in European culture, in white fragility, that even if you do have a Black or brown body saying those words, it does not translate the same. You know, I'm not saying to burn every single copy of like a Tennessee Williams play, burn all Fort Wilder, like absolutely not advocating for that. But to also know that there are Black and brown, there are indigenous playwrights who exist today, who are contemporary, who we view as classic works that we can still produce and do. And thinking about how we do that, especially within the institutions, like definitely co-sign all of these things. Wonderful panelists have said yes. But also thinking about who are teaching these classes, who are directing these shows. And then, but think more than that. Are those folks, if they are folks of color, are they being supported in the administration by their board chair? Who are those people? Because you also think about, I think about faculty members all the time and faculty members of color and how quick burnout is and how quickly they leave those positions comparatively. And that's because the system itself is so deeply rooted in colonization and continues to harm these folks. And so my biggest piece of advocacy to push forward right now is, before we do all of these things, let's look at the foundation of our institution, of our organization. If that foundation is not set up to support Black, Indigenous, and people of color, then it's not going to trickle down. Reagan was wrong about trickle down economics, and that's wrong about trickling down accessibility. I love your laughs.
I think also I wanted to touch on something that Tara kind of reminded me of, and what she was saying as well, that I had wanted to bring up, which is the audition room, right? So because you mentioned, who's directing these plays, and if your company, the directors that you typically have used are all white. I'm not saying that you can never use a white director on a play that has people of color in it. I'm not saying that, but because I have directed plays where all of the actors were white and I'm Black, and I can still direct those pieces. But there should be someone in the room who is Black. I'm sorry, but I should not be auditioning for A Raisin in the Sun in front of a whole panel of white producers, directors, stage manager, and not one Black person on that panel. Especially if there's times I've walked into a room, there were 10 people there to audition me for a role, and it was a role where I had to portray things that were, my people's oppression, and not one person in that room besides me was a person of color. And to ask actors to put themselves through that trauma and be judged by people who don't share that ancestry, and not a single person in that room shares that ancestry. I don't know that the producers realize what they're putting the actors through by doing that, because it adds another layer of pain to what it is that you're going through. And so you leave the room kind of carrying the trauma of what you've portrayed, and the trauma of what that audition room was. So that's something to think about. And I was a little hesitant to even say it, because I don't want to not get into the audition rooms, because they look like, oh, well, Rachel said she doesn't like our audition room, but it shouldn't be. It should be, if you really care about the actors, if you really care about that your room is a room that's inviting to the actors that are going to portray the story that you're asking them to portray.
Also, in addition to the trauma, it's unequitable labor. If you want to talk about equity and equity in the way you're paying people, you cannot have one person of this lived experience in the room. They automatically become your EDI consultant and your dramaturg, and that's not fair. So figure it out, pay people, or you can give them a pay bump. You can ask them if they're okay with that and give them a pay bump. But the amount of times that I've heard of I'll talk about it, I don't care. Nymph programmed Emma Teal last season or 2 seasons ago, right before they closed. And in that show, every iteration of it that I've heard, the writers have been kicked out of the room while the Black cast members rewrite things that need to be adjusted for tone and for what's the word? Whatever, truthfulness. That's a good word. We'll go with
authenticity.
Yeah, authenticity. Thank you. And I think that's gross, because do you know who's not attached to those shows when they leave? The people who did the work. They didn't even keep the same director, and it was supposed to be programmed at a regional theater this season. They didn't even keep the same Black woman director. They gave it to another Black man, and I'm sure they would do the same thing to him. And it's just it's unequitable, and it's ridiculous, because if we were in any other field, it would not be acceptable. But because we're in the theater, it is, because it's supposed to be for the love of the art, but the art is sucky anyway. So who the fuck wants to do this?
Preach.
I think Amara has given us a perfect segue to commence, to thank everyone. And Amara, who the fuck wants to do them anyway, is you, because you are brave, you're educated, you're vulnerable. All 6 of our panelists tonight's show came. I don't know that you knew that you were coming to bear your feelings, but you did. And I'm a high school teacher. I love watching this. You taught me a lot tonight. Thank you. I appreciate everyone for bearing through technical difficulties. Clarence wasn't stopped by anything. He found his phone. He called us in. Thank you, Clarence. This wouldn't have been the same without you. I want to remind everyone that you're going to get a copy of this recording by tomorrow, and also a copy of the slides where we will continue to repeat to you how you can support our 6 panelists. There's ways. Money is not a problem. Shower them with money. It's fine. I'm speaking on your behalf. It's fine. If it ruins their taxes this year, so be it. You know, so please continue to support these voices. These voices need to exist, and they need to be heard and amplified. We invite you to our July session and August. For those of you who are teachers, our session in August is going to be geared directly to back to school and how to be a decent human being / anti-racist. I mean, I think they're interchangeable at this point. Clarence, I know I didn't ask you for this ahead of time, but since you're a man who loves improvisation, would you mind leading us through a closing exercise? Wait, actually, sorry, Clarence. Do any of our panels have any closing words?
I just want to thank everyone for the fact, everyone who tuned in, for caring about decolonizing the theater. I think that's the first step in actually making it happen. So thank you all for taking that first step of caring enough to be a part of this.
Clarence, we're ready for you. Oh, so did I cut someone off again? Because I can't. I'm still dealing with how I completely ignore Tara. I'm sorry, Tara. All right, Clarence, I think we're ready for you.
Okay. I think you began with breathing, so let's do a little bit of breathing. If you would, just take your hands and kind of fold around your throat, and then just kind of massage and feel as though your lungs were in between your hands and your throat was full of oxygen and air, and you're massaging your hands and your throat, moving your head and neck around, just giving yourself, palpating the muscles and the bones of the throat, giving yourself massage for having spoken, giving yourself space for voice, allowing your voice to come out. If we could go up and then kind of massage around the ears for giving us time to listen, to hear what others have said, to take it in, just kind of pinch and massage around the ears. If you can, slip over to the mouth and kind of just lightly tap the lips, again, for more voice and for speaking. And since we've got the hands here in front of us, blow into your hands as though you had a whistle, as though there were a prayer to go out, and sending it out into space. And then last two, interlace your fingers. Take a look to see which one is on top. Usually the one that's on top is your dominant side, and we're asking for people to make changes. We're asking for us to make changes. Let's just do a little simple one here. Flip which hand is on top, interlace the fingers the other direction, and take a look and see and sense. Close the eyes and sense what that's like to change just that little bit there. And then also how powerful it is to make that little bit of a change. Our hands are in a prayer shape. I wish us all well in all of our endeavors as we go out and try to make change as we go. Again, give yourself a blow into the hands and send the energy out into the universe. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Clarence.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Be safe,
Thank
everyone.
you. Yes.